So everyone knows that the Aramco power rankings on F1's official Instagram are usually a load of rubbish. So I thought for the 2025 season, I'd bring this channel back to life and do my own version of the power rankings after every single race weekend. Starting of course with the Australian Grand Prix. I'm going to rank the entire grid from 20th to 1st, with 20 points being assigned to the driver in 20th, and 1 point being assigned to the driver in 1st, with the lower score being the better of course. I'll add up the points as the races go on, and by the end of the season, the driver with the fewest points will be our power rankings winner and should be, in theory, the driver of the year. So enough with the explanations, let's rank every driver from the 2025 Australian Grand Prix from worst to best. In 20th is Isack Hadjar. Now I do feel bad for Isack because he actually had a really impressive qualifying performance, qualifying in P11, which was the highest of any of the entire rookie class. But I mean, you're never going to be anywhere but last when you don't even start the race, spinning out on the formation lap on his very first race. 19th is Jack Doohan. Similarly to Hadjar, Doohan actually had a pretty decent qualifying performance, qualifying in P14, which was second best in the rookie class. But again, similarly to Hadjar, he lost it very early in the race, only making it through the first few corners before putting it in the wall. And crashing out that early in the race has to land you near the bottom. 18th is Liam Lawson. Listen, we've all been saying for years that Red Bull second seat is a little bit cursed, but when Max is qualifying in P3 and Lawson can only manage 18th, it really just isn't good enough. And it wasn't much better in the race either. His progress was slow from the start, only really overtaking the Haas's, and then he crashed it in the late rain. I can't see how I can put him any higher than this. In 17th, I'm actually going to go for Fernando Alonso. Now he had an okay qualifying, starting the race in P12, and was running in a solid enough position for most of the race. But the reason he's this low down is because you just cannot be crashing into the wall under no pressure at this much experience and at this quality of a driver. So he has to be this low for me. 16th is Carlos Sainz. Now this one is slightly more difficult to judge because he had a decent qualifying for Williams, but when you compare him to Alex Albon, maybe he underperformed a little bit. And then he did crash out really early in the race, but the general consensus is that was more of a car issue rather than his. But I just don't think I can rank him higher than any of the other drivers coming next, considering where he qualified compared to his teammate and considering how early he went out. 15th is Gabriel Bortoleto, who definitely impressed me in qualifying. I wasn't expecting him to be that fast. Out qualifying Nico Hülkenberg and getting out of Q1 in a Sauber at his first time of asking is very impressive. But when it came to the race, he was a little bit slow and steady, I suppose you could say, which can sometimes work in your favour, but ultimately he ended up crashing anyway, so I just don't think I could rank him higher than any of the classified finishers. Right, now we're on to drivers that actually finished the Grand Prix, and on 14th is Ollie Behrman. So Ollie was on the back foot basically the entire weekend and had a pretty shocking qualifying, and to be honest his race wasn't much better, but he did get to the checkered flag, which is more than I could say for a lot of the drivers, so that's why he ends up here. 13 is Esteban Ocon, and listen, I know that Haas car is clearly very bad, but I literally don't remember seeing Ocon at all throughout the race. He was just never a factor anywhere, he never popped up anywhere, he never seemed to do anything. I just can't rate him any higher than this, despite how bad the car must be. 12th is going to be Lewis Hamilton. This was clearly not the Ferrari debut that Lewis would have been dreaming of. Qualifying, he was nowhere, he was never looking to challenge the front. And even when it came to the race, aside from a short stint where he went into P1 during the whole late rain kerfuffle where he gambled to stay on slicks, he was never really a factor throughout the race and ended up in a measly 10th. I hope he can regain some form as the season goes on, but this was not a good race for Lewis. 11th is going to be Charles Leclerc. The Ferrari is clearly not as good as we all thought it was going to be, and we can't really hold that against the drivers too much. But at the same time, based on expectations, based on how good of a driver we know Leclerc is, I was really expecting a lot more from him. Yes, he did beat Hamilton and he did look like the better driver the whole weekend, but it was still just a bit of a mid-race. Okay, top 10 time, and where we actually start talking about drivers that had a good weekend with Pierre Gasly. Pierre had a really strong quali, starting the race in P9 and just behind the Ferraris, and was actually running in a really solid point scoring position for basically the entirety of the race until it came to the rain towards the end, and strategy just didn't work out in his favour and he ended up missing out in the points. But it was a really solid weekend from Pierre, and I think it's one that he could be very proud about. 9th is going to be Yuki Tsunoda. I think Yuki had a pretty incredible weekend. Even though he didn't end up finishing the points, I think it's a weekend that he's going to walk away from feeling super proud about how he performed. He had an incredible quali, starting the race in P5, which is his highest performance ever, and he was running in a really high point scoring position for the majority of the race until he too gambled to stay out on slicks when the late rain came, and that ended up dropping him out of the points. But considering how annoyed Yuki would have felt heading into the start of the season when he clearly thought he deserved that Red Bull seat, a weekend like this will give him loads of confidence, and I'm expecting a really good season from him this year. So in 8th, I've gone for Oscar Piastri, and this is probably going to be my most controversial pick. Some people will think maybe he deserved to be higher, some people will think he should have been lower. So here's my thoughts. It was a very good quali, and he was unlucky to miss out on pole to Norris. And he clearly has the pace to challenge both Lando and Max in the race, pushing Max into a mistake and also getting close to Lando until the team told him to back off. But small mistakes do have massive impacts when you're racing at the front, and unfortunately, a small mistake led to the entire race unfolding for Piastri. Considering the ups of having a really strong pace and pulling off some amazing overtakes, with the lows of spinning out of P2 and potentially throwing away a race win, I think 7th is a good place for Piastri to land this week. 7th is Lance Stroll, who was definitely my biggest surprise of the weekend. So I don't think Lance did anything particularly amazing at any one point. He had an okay qualifying and he was running just outside the points for most of the race. But a P6 in an Aston Martin, by keeping his nose clean, keeping it on the track, and just being really solid and flying under the radar, is an amazing performance for Lance, and he deserves to be in this position. In 6th, it's going to be Nico Hülkenberg. To be fair, I think you could say that Hulk was quite a surprise this weekend as well. But personally, I feel like I've gotten a little bit more used to him getting good results and picking up good points for his team when races are a little bit scrappy. His qualifying was actually a bit poor, being out-qualified by his rookie teammate, but of course he kept it clean in the race, similar to how Lance did, and picked up a fantastic P7 for Sauber. In 5th, I'm going to go for George Russell. This might seem a little bit harsh considering Russell qualified in 3rd and finished the race on the podium as well. And he was very, very solid all weekend. He never really put too much of a foot wrong, but at the same time, he never really looked like he was going to win. He was always a bit off the pace of the true top 3. But he was always there just behind, and if something had happened, I know for certain he would have been there to pick up the pieces. So I feel like this is a good place to put Russell in. In 4th, I'm actually going to go for his teammate, Kimi Antonelli. So Kimi's weekend started quite poorly with P18 in qualifying. Now this was due to running over some gravel and causing damage, but at the same time that is also his fault, so I do have to take that into account. But from P18 to finishing P4 is an amazing drive, with changing conditions when basically all of the other rookies ended up crashing out, all of the pressure that was on his shoulders coming in as a rookie driver into a quote-unquote top team. I thought it was an unbelievably confident and also fast performance from Kimi, and I'm really excited to see what he can do in the races to come. And 3rd, I'm going to have to go with the reigning champion, Max Verstappen. Let's be honest, Max is probably dragging that Red Bull much closer towards the McLarens than it ought to be. It was a really strong performance from Max again. He was fast and he was able to apply a lot of pressure to the McLarens, although he did have a couple of uncharacteristic mistakes such as his lockup when Piastri was pressuring him. But he still finished less than a second off the lead of a car that was clearly faster than him on the day. So while he didn't quite have the edge this time out, I still think it was a really strong performance from him. In 2nd, I've gone for what will likely be a lot of people's top pick, Alex Albon. What a weekend from Alex. I think it was probably his strongest weekend that he's ever had in F1. With Carlos coming into the team, I heard a lot of people saying that they thought Albon was going to fall back and he's going to be a shell of his former self and he wasn't going to be as good as everybody thought that he was. But he proved everybody wrong in this race. He qualified in P6, finished in P5 and ran solidly the entire race long. What an incredible result for both him and for Williams. But I think the number one driver this weekend had to be Lando Norris. Pole position, fastest lap, handled the race start fine, handled all of the safety car restarts just perfectly, and of course got the race win. It does just have to be Lando Norris this weekend, doesn't it? In a year where he's obviously going to be under an awful lot of pressure to perform, considering he probably has the fastest car and is possibly now the favourite to win the championship, he kept it all together on a hectic day and has shown that he's ready for a proper title fight this year. So those are my power rankings for the 2025 Australian Grand Prix. I'll stick them all up on screen now. Let me know which ones you agree with, which ones you disagree with, and maybe you could also just give me some feedback on how I could improve this series going forward, as I plan to do this for the rest of the season.